Hey Zeno,
Hey Johnny, how's it going, man?
it's great. It's Friday afternoon here while we're recording. It's sunny, ready for the weekend, and ready for another podcast.
Yes, and I feel like today's gonna be a really nice discussion. It's gonna be only the two of us again, and we're gonna talk about what it means to be enterprise ready. And that's a subject that we both uh, know a lot about. We went through that experience of getting a product and turning it into an enterprise offer. And I feel like sometimes people don't really understand what that actually means. Sometimes people don't want to understand because that's a sometimes not a very sexy topic to discuss, but it is what ultimately decides if one company maybe will succeed or maybe it's going to fail, right? So we know that there's so many startups that are focused on a SaaS offer that is like a very low ticket, like you pay 99 a month or $9 a month, something that is really inexpensive, self-service. You put your credit card and that's it. And then you have all these other companies that are building for these huge brands and they are selling things like for a couple $1,000s or hundreds of thousands of dollars every single year. So there's a big distinction between these two worlds, right? How do you see that?
Yeah, there's so many different business models to fit your product into, like depending on what you're building. But definitely a dominant one is like the freemium to premium model, right? So you have like a lot of people using your product for free, but you're hoping that having this mass adoption leads to, the funnel up, right? So slowly people will start paying, some at the lowest, a lot at the lowest tier, less at the higher ones, and it goes on up. And enterprise is always like kind of this mysterious top of the pyramid, It's like no one really wants to go there, especially if you're working in, like if you're doing like side projects or you have a really small company that is usually really daunting and also just doesn't sound like it doesn't appeal to who you are usually as your own company, and that's even what I've experienced and I think we have is there's such a satisfaction to building something that you are your own audience and you love using your own product. And it makes it easier to build. It makes it easier to market. It makes it easier to pretty much everything is just a little bit smoother because you like what you're building. You like what you're creating. And usually when you go to the enterprise market, that has to change because usually you're not the enterprise market. Not like that's not always the case, but like generally you have that shift and then things just kind of get less fun and whatnot. And we'll go into a lot of that later, but it's really hard to know what model is best for, any specific product or whatnot. Yeah, there's this interesting video by Michael Greenidge about crossing the chasm to enterprise. And part of his argument is that it's like a necessary step in order for your company to grow to be multi-billion dollar company. That's like you just can't get there, or there's like so few examples of getting there without going to that market that it ends up just being this kind of inevitable step, even though it's dreaded. It's kind of a weird reality that we face.
Yeah, it's interesting because like as you were saying, right? Sometimes we're building products in a selfish way. We want to solve our own problems and we want to do things that are going to help people like us. And I feel like it's probably a good idea for us to contextualize our own experience to people because that will illustrate the things that we're going to talk later. We started a product just like what we were describing, a product that was solving our own issues that had the identity that we wanted, and that product was WeDeploy. So we built this product. It had like an amazing developer experience, the branding, everything was tailored for developers. But at the same time, even though everything was doing well, we were attracting lots of users, people were loving the product, we didn't get the business model super well, I would say. We actually knew that, okay, if we make those things and if we keep investing, maybe 5 to 6 years from now, we're going to break even and now we're going to be able to be profitable. But as a bootstrapped company, we didn't have that time. We needed to, be profitable earlier. And the way we found to be profitable earlier was, let's rebrand. Let's switch this product, which is already good. It's proven in the market. We know that it works. And let's make it enterprise ready. So that change had to do with lots of things, right? Number one, and very silly things too, right? Okay, the name of the product. What is the logo, the perception that you're sending? Even the colors. I feel like that's something that people don't talk about. Like, think about the most enterprise and B2B friendly companies that you know. They're typically that light blue type of color.
Salesforce blue.
Salesforce blue, exactly. They are not like the oranges that you see. They're not like green or purple. Obviously, there are definitely some edge cases and companies that can leverage that own brand in their ways. But typically, that's what you see, right? So those are some of these small changes that we made from like a marketing perspective. And even the tone of the brand. Like, what are the keywords that you're putting on your landing page? Those are really things that move the needle. And once we did that, a bunch of other changes, right? It was not as simple as I'm describing. We had to do a lot of work internally, a lot of convincing, a lot of materials to support that new product. But we were able to thrive and then profit very early with that move. What are some of the other changes that you saw that because we did that, we were able to be enterprise ready?
Yeah. There's so many different things. I mean, I feel like everything is impacted on some level. A couple of I think the ones that were bigger, one just massive one is security. So you go from security being like honestly a nice to have, a wish you had if something goes wrong, but mostly a nice to have. Like, your customers are probably not choosing you or not choosing you based on security in the freemium model. Now, maybe that's changing a little bit more with like data privacy stuff. That's seems to be a little bit more like kind of on the minds of the consumer a little bit more now. But security in general, most people don't know how it works enough to care, you know? And so changing from security being, mostly like application security. Okay, yeah, we have like a couple processes. Like, we try to release without introducing bugs. We try to stay up. We encrypt, some things and have authentication and maybe like two-factor. Like, some of those like just basic ones. That's not super difficult. The tricky thing comes when it's more around compliance. And oftentimes, like these large enterprises have long lists of like non-negotiables when it comes to security. So they have their own like huge security program, and they want that to apply to all of their supply chain. So if you're going to be a new vendor for them, they need to know that they can pass on the requirements that they're putting on themselves. They can pass it off to you. And they want to know that you're passing that off to your vendors and like so on and so forth. And that brings a lot of like trust for them. And one of the main ways that that's achieved is through getting like these like security certifications like SOC 2, ISO 27001, ISO 27018 and 17, and HIPAA.
FedRAMP.
FedRAMP, like the list goes on. But those are almost ways that you can prove your security program without having to like document everything in a way that your prospects or leads have to process it themselves. You can just kind of have a somewhat of a stamp of, hey, you guys are probably following these standards. We're also following it. And because we're following it, we're also being audited externally to prove that, which means there's a level of trust that it's actually happening rather than like enterprises don't just take your word for it,
Oh yeah.
Like they want to know that like there's actual, it's actually happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. If you think like about someone who just built B2C products, they only build consumer-friendly products so far in their lives. Let's say they decide to move to this enterprise world, and they get their first RFP, right? That could be a really scary thing. Do you remember like that time when you got that first RFP and you had like no idea what to do? What is this in the first place? Like how was it?
Oh my gosh, it's so much stress. I have distinct memories. One of the first big companies that we signed, it was a massive security negotiation, and we had like just gotten our first security certificate. But that wasn't enough. Like there was a lot we had to supplement and a lot of stuff that we were changing within our organization, processes we were making for them, like because they were kind of our thought was, okay, if we could sign them and their needs would probably trickle down to a lot of they're almost like a persona, we could use like, okay, if it works for them, it's probably gonna, we can copy that same work that we did for them onto other customers. So that was actually really helpful. Like even just targeting, customers that we wanted to have, even though it was really hard to get, was helpful to give us almost a North Star to know this is where we needed to go. And we were ready to make changes and adapt. And part of it is oh man, there's actually so many things. But I think a big part is being honest, because there is a lot of like subjectivity when it comes to security. So a lot of things you answer and they take your word for it. Like even though they want to have the assurance as much as they can, there's a lot of things you say. And I guess if anything, I would say like from going through that, my encouragement would be like, don't say what you don't have. So that's only going to come back to bite you later. And a security problem, like a real security problem, is much worse than a hypothetical security problem. So working that out in the sales process, even in a super intense way, which it can often be, is infinitely easier and even less expensive for your organization than going through that like a real security incident and then the customer realizing that actually you weren't doing what you said you were supposed to be doing, or you didn't respond well, or you didn't have these things in place. Like, oh, you said that was encrypted. It wasn't encrypted. You said you were going to respond to me within this many days and you didn't. All this different stuff. And it blows up so fast that it would be better to be honest at the beginning and only take what you can take on before just kind of saying, oh, like we will have that. So let's say we have it, or, just obviously don't lie, but with security, it is a little bit tricky. Like it's just enough on the line that there's a little bit of lying that could happen. That I would just say, try to be as honest as you can. Just be realistic.
Yeah, it's really like interesting to see how like there are all these check boxes that that enterprise vendor wants to make sure that they are in place, right? And I think it starts from the security certifications. Do you have SOC 2? Check. Do you have HIPAA? Check. Do you have FedRAMP? Check. And that's only the beginning, right? Because if you are like an enterprise IT leader, what basically happens is that you're just working on tons of systems. You have lots of things on your plate, and you don't really care about the product that you're buying, to be honest. Like there's usually a different group of people, like let's say the marketing department chooses a certain tool, or the legal department chooses a certain tool, engineering chooses a tool. And then now the IT department comes in, and what is their responsibility? Okay, I want to make sure that this tool is going to fit on like our entire system, our entire technology stack, and also it's going to fit in a way that is secure and compliant and all that. So it's a completely different persona. They don't really care about, this product is better and makes our marketers more productive. No. Like, does this fit my infrastructure? That's all they care, right? So what else? Like, what else do you think, like, besides the security certifications that actually, like, moves the needle for them and it's important at the end of the day?
I mean, I think you hinted at one of them. Like, you're no longer selling, for the most part, to the end user. You're selling to the buyer, which is usually not the developer using the tool or the HR team using the tool or whatever. Like, you need to sell to them to an extent. Like, there's totally inroads to organizations through the end user, but very rarely is that person the person that is like holding the purse strings to be able to say, yes, let's buy it, or approve it, even with security concerns or legal concerns or whatever. Like, there's people in the organization that can override those things. This is such a good tool that even though we don't have the security certificate, we're going to move forward. Or even though we don't have like the perfect DPA or agreements in place, we're still going to do it because it's like so good. It's going to save us money, all that stuff. But that's not almost never the end user. And so from like both a marketing perspective and also from a product perspective, who do you build the product for? And I mean, I think we actually both worked in product together, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because that's like you live in that every day. Like, you're building for the end user, but yet you're also building for the person that is going to actually say yes to the deal. And those are different people, totally different things that they want.
Yeah. If you're driving the direction of a product, I feel like the key is to almost have like that budget mentality, where you have a certain budget for the end users and you have a certain budget for the buyer. And even the language that you use when you're trying to convince and talk to each one of those groups is completely different, right? To the end user, you're talking most of the times about how can they be more productive, how they can have a faster time to market, or how they're going to save money. And then for that buyer, it's mostly about how is this going to connect to your system really well, how this is going to reduce the maintenance time, not necessarily the time to perform a task, but the time it takes to maintain something. So it's really nuanced. Sometimes you have to focus more in one group than the other. And one of the things that I love, you mentioned this talk, the Crossing the Enterprise Chasm by Michael. And Michael is the CEO of WorkOS, which is a company that I have been really like looking into and observing, because they make like APIs to help with that. So there are a couple of features that every company needs. They need a way to log in with their SSO. So that's one. They have a certain authentication provider. They need to make sure that all the users are going through that same flow. As an IT manager, you don't want to maintain all that by yourself. The other one is Active Directory, right? So you have users in your system. And if you're a big company, let's say 30,000, 50,000 employees, and like you're probably hiring tons of people every single week. Imagine if you had to every week like go and add to GitHub and then add to this other system, add to Figma, add to Miro, add to whatever, you name it, Slack, all that. If you had to do that every single time for everybody that is joining the company, that would be a lot of work. And think about the people who are leaving. There are people leaving every single day too. It's a big company. So now you have to deprovision them, make sure they are out of those systems. And it's just a lot of manual work that you want to avoid. So the cool thing about those directory syncs is that you have all the users, you have sometimes the different permissions that they have, and then what you can do is connect to that. So that's another big feature that WorkOS also solves. So I feel like there's this trend that if you are building a product, now let me put my like product manager hat. All that I care is that my product is solving and helping the lives of my end users. I don't really have time to invest on this. Like building an SSO is so difficult. So then what ended up happening is that you rely on Auth0, you rely on Okta, because those are the providers that are giving you that. And you save much more time on that space. So I feel like that's a trend that I'm seeing. Instead of getting 3 engineers and having them spend 3 months building something that is going to be really hard to maintain, like SSO is so hard to maintain, like SAML integration, those things are really difficult. Just use a third-party vendor, make sure they handle that part for you, and then you can focus on the product, right?
Yeah, that decision of what you build and what you buy is really tough, because you can get into like dependencies that you wish you hadn't. You know, like if you integrate with a tool that's not enterprise ready and you need to be enterprise ready, that could be something that's like dragging you down. But at the same time, using something like WorkOS that is already battle tested and even designed, like WorkOS is super cool. Like all this that we're talking about, they're basically productizing it, right? Saying like, hey, companies need to go through this journey. So like, what are the things they need and how can we provide that? So, it's really hard to know because also, and I think we've felt this as well, when you're in like the early startup phase, especially if you're like pre-enterprise, you can move around so quickly in terms of like what vendors you use, what technologies you use, people, everything is just very fluid. And especially if you have funding, you know, like it's very flexible, right? You can explore, you can pivot, all this stuff. The more that you cater to enterprises, the more you're going to act like an enterprise, which also means you will go slower. You'll take more time vetting. You'll take more time releasing. You'll take more time onboarding. You'll take more time procuring, and even the sales process will take long. Like all those things will take longer. Now, I think we should also talk about like speed versus quality, and that dilemma, because it doesn't need to be slower. Like there's optimizations, you know, like I think a lot of times people going to enterprise kind of give up and just say, okay, well, I have to be slow, or I can't use any tools or whatever because everything's closed off. But I think there's ways. Now, obviously, it depends on your company and everything, but especially as you're going that direction, there's like more and more, there's like safe ways to use vendors and all this in a way that isn't detrimental to you being enterprise ready, you know?
Yeah. Like even like what you're saying about procurement, right? If you're like a startup, you can like sign up for a tool and start using on day one. You don't have to go to the whole legal process and negotiate different terms. But if you're just like, okay, taking care of tons of customers and you have tons of responsibility, and every little decision that you make are going to affect the vast majority of your enterprise customers, now you have to be much more careful. And then That's why you have like those longer procurement cycles. So I think we can see and think about speed in different ways when we're talking about those different realities, right? There's speed in terms of like adopting a new tool. That's a different speed. There's speed in terms of the buying process. Like, okay, day one, you put your credit card and that's it. But there are many companies that's not even an option for them. It's not that simple. They don't want, like, if they think they need to like just use a credit card, they will like immediately think, oh, there's a problem because I actually like we're used to, okay, like a wire transfer or things like that. Yep. So like going from a self-service mentality to a longer sales process that could take 3 to 6 to 9 months, sometimes more than a year. Yep. That's really tough. Yep. And then there's speed from an internal perspective, from like a release cycle. You can be releasing and delivering value every single week to your customers and have a really strong software development lifecycle. Or you can be more conservative and you can test, make sure everything is well, like have a huge release cycle. And then 6 months later, you come up and say, hey, everyone, we have a new software update. Here it is, So it's really tough. And there are pros and cons to both of these, the end of those spectrums, right?
Yeah, what have you seen? Because we've tried so many different things in terms of releases internally. And we've done like everything from totally ad hoc, like whenever we want to like super scheduled, like a calendar, to even like a hybrid where it's like every week, but not if we're not ready, but we try to every week, and we have like specific windows and everything. So what is, especially since you're so involved with the release process and one of the main stakeholders, like how do you see that balance, and what would be like any advice to like trying to find a good balance there?
Yeah, it really depends on the stage of the company, because my default answer to you would be release as soon as possible. Like if you have something good to go, just do it, But at the same time, you have to be careful, right? Let's say you have, and it's this question, there's so many different details that we could go to. But let's say you have a small company, you have some users, but not as many. Okay, maybe you could like release every single week or month, and that'll be a good way of showing movement, showing that you are delivering value, and show that you care. Like ultimately, as a product, you want to show that you care about that problem space and you're investing on that problem space. As a customer, I want to see that the product that I'm using is getting better every single day. So this is one approach. Another approach is, let's say you are still a small team, but you have tons of customers. Now, there's a risk here, because if I have a lot of customers, if I ship something and there's some problem that I need to revert that release, maybe we didn't do our research as good as we could. Maybe we're trying a hypothesis. We don't know if this is going to work with every single user. Now you have to explore different ideas. You can use release flags, and there are tons of products that could help with that. There's LaunchDarkly, there's Split.io. So those products are really good because now you can have some checks on your code, and then you can say, okay, I'm releasing this feature and I'm releasing to 80% of my user base. Or I'm releasing just like Twitter Blue, I think is the name of the new Twitter product. They're releasing only for Canada and Australia, maybe. I forgot the countries. So now they're testing in smaller markets. They are making sure that these are the things that they should be doing. And then once they are more comfortable, okay, now we can expand to other customers. So it's really tough. There are different go-to-market strategies that you can do. So feature flags are really useful for that. Now, if we go to another spectrum where you have a huge team, you have tons of products, now it gets really complicated, right? But so let's think about Apple. Now we're talking about hardware. So if we talk about hardware, that's even much more difficult than software, because software you can like ship and then deliver the update and that's it. With hardware,
revert,
there's
right?
and revert, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't. Let's say an iOS release comes in.
Yeah.
Like you can't revert an iOS release.
Yeah.
But if there's a huge problem, you have to act super fast and release a new one. Maybe force an update, which is another dilemma, because with your device, sometimes you don't want that. Yep. So it's really, really, really difficult. And if you're talking about hardware, now we have a whole operation that you need to worry about. Like we have to produce those items and ship them worldwide. So then what Apple does is they might take a whole year to announce something. But then when they announce, there's like this big splash. So you have time to like build the marketing strategy, like do a full show and make sure there's a lot of hype. So I wouldn't say there's I wish we knew like the secret formula to releasing and making customers happy, but there isn't. And like if we have to count on enterprise customers to update software themselves, that's a whole other game, because they typically don't want, like, let's say you are IT manager. Like you have a software that is running. You already went through the whole procurement process. You decided to buy. There are like 1,000 people using that software in your company, and that's working. Nobody's like calling you and complaining you about that. Now this company comes with a new version. They're changing lots of things on the UI. There are new features that are going to empower the user. As an IT manager, again, you don't really care as much about the end user features. And upgrading means a huge risk for you, because you have to worry about the whole process of upgrading. What if there are issues? What if there are security holes? So then there's a lot of inertia that happens. So, dude, it's tough. It's really tough. Like updating and releasing when we're talking about the enterprise market, it's a pretty unique scenario.
Yeah. And it seems like there's a lot of things that to the, I don't even know exactly what to call it, whether it's like the consumer market, I guess, almost, and then like the business market. And that's like very broad, because enterprise is like a subcategory of the business market. But something that can build trust with one market could tear down trust with the other market. Something that totally works on one, works against you on the other. And I feel like releases is a great example where for one audience, it could be, and it can flip for both. Like both of them can have, there's like your unique audience, your user base is going to have its own needs. So this is not like a one or the other, but like maybe more traditionally, the consumer market is going to want updates. And if there's not updates, that actually will decrease trust, could increase churn, because they're not feeling the newness, they're not seeing new features. There's other competitors that are like right on the heels, also releasing features and everything. It's this really competitive race. On the enterprise side, if you release too much, that can actually cause churn, especially if you're building a habit of like bad releases, like not quality releases, releases you have to explain or roll back and things like that. But even if they're good releases, sometimes too often, just the fact that there's change can turn off some of the enterprise market. So it is really important to do your research and even to listen to your users, during that release time, like right after release, like be looking at your support tickets, like how are people talking about and feeling about your releases? Is it something they actually want more of? Is it something that they want less of? Is it something that they want, warning about, like they want to know ahead of time? Is it something that they want to be able to choose? Like there's so many, and that kind of also gets into the whole customization. Like enterprises love having it tailored exactly to them. Not
They
even
need
to
control, right?
It's
They need
complete
control.
Yeah, absolutely. And when something's not in their control, it's I feel like sometimes we can be hard on enterprises, like, oh, they're just like these big grumpy companies or something. But it makes sense. Like, these are some of the biggest companies in the world running massive operations, so many users internally, externally dependent on these softwares or hardware, whatever. And they can't, in one sense, they can't afford to have that kind of, I don't know what the word is, like not a vulnerability, but that question mark. Like, they need to be able to control in order to deliver exactly what they're setting out to deliver. So it's tough to cater to that if each one wants customizations. How do you provide that for everyone? Because if they're all different, then it's really tricky.
And then if you allow them to customize, now they're gonna build all these sorts of integrations that is gonna make it so much harder to upgrade later on. So we have that even like a deeper dependency and a way more difficult process to upgrade from one version to the other. I feel like you touched on a really important point when it comes to like the things that are gonna attract you and the things that are gonna have you like think that, oh, this is not for me, and that are gonna push you away. And the marketing copy, like the site, what the site tells you, like the keywords that they're using, the language that they are using, it starts from there. Like, if you see something and then you're like, oh, no, this is too much. Okay, maybe like you're not in a stage where like you need that kind of service. Or maybe if you're too simplistic and you're like, oh, everything's so easy and it's a beautiful world over here, then they might look into that and say, oh, this is not for me. Like, I need something more robust. And even like the way you try a product. So one thing you could be doing is sign up now, or start a trial, start for free, versus schedule a demo. That's like, something is enterprise or not enterprise just by that, just by the CTA, the call to action. And I feel like there are more things too. You talked about support. What are the differences that you see in a self-service product versus an enterprise product?
Yeah. I feel like one clear one, even though it crosses over, like both do it and also both like it and don't like it on some level. But I think chat is a really interesting space for the differences between support for the consumer market and like enterprise market, because both of them crave immediate answers, right? Like, if there's a problem, it's still a human on the other end, right? It's still like someone opening a ticket that needs help, needs answers, needs solutions, whatever. And so speed and efficiency and effectiveness and everything apply, and chat is a great way to accomplish that, because you can get more you can bridge the gap between responses and transfer knowledge really quickly, get to the bottom of the issue, and maybe even solve it before there has to be a ticket open and all this stuff. At the same time, though, chat is really hard to implement for enterprise, because they really want a robust support system. So SLAs, response times, like 24/7 coverage, so it can get really expensive really quickly. Some of the metrics start to get kind of different when you're looking at consumers versus enterprise. In general, for like a consumer, if you're opening a ticket and you're unsatisfied, you're probably more at risk of churn for like a bad support experience. Whereas for enterprise, that's possible. Like there's totally churn from poor support, but probably more than anything, it's going to be a cost issue. So like that bad support experience is going to be like a delayed go live. It's going to be escalated up to their CTO. It's going to become this, insane kind of incident between the organizations. And you're going to spend a ton of money just like having everyone's attention on this, building like, slide decks and documents to explain what happened, and like even rush like expedite features to get them out to make them happy. And so they're probably not going to like leave off of like, oh, there's a support ticket that like you didn't answer on time or whatever. Whereas like if I'm paying $12 a month, I'd be like, oh man, their support really sucks. Like I could get this service somewhere else, and I've heard they've had great support. Like I'll just go over there, But for enterprise, I could spend thousands, millions of dollars just like reacting and supporting them after that bad experience.
Yeah. And as a vendor, what you do is, let's say you are offering that service, like how do you avoid those millions of dollars that you're spending on like a support problem, right? I feel like there are mechanisms that you can put in place to avoid that. For example, you can have SLAs for response time, or you can have SLAs for resolution time. That's a completely different game. Like having that first response in 1 hour, that's one thing. That's something that you can put in place once you have a 24/7 support staff. But like resolution time, like, okay, resolution in 1 hour or in 3 days, that's really difficult. So what you do is you start creating support tiers. You have the really basic support that you don't get as much, or you have like the diamond support. And with the diamond support, now you have resolution times, you have a dedicated support rep, you have a customer success engineer that is working with you. And then there's everything in the sales process too. You might have a dedicated account manager, you might have a dedicated sales engineer that is making sure that everything's running smoothly. You have sometimes consulting packages. Like there's so many different things that you can bundle to make sure that, okay, this enterprise customer is being taken care of. But that costs money, right? You need a big operation. You need processes in place. So that's super, super difficult.
Yeah. And I think part of the challenge of like, again, crossing that chasm is figuring out what that's worth to you and to your customers, because I feel like a lot of what we said is kind of negative in one sense towards the enterprise market, even though that's been our success, like personally. And I think part of that is like, and I don't think we've said this yet, but like acknowledging that there's tons of effort, there's tons of cost, but there's like, an equal opposite reaction, like in terms of potential pipeline and what customers are willing to spend for similar services. Like we could repackage our offering that's going to enterprise for consumer, and they would pay probably like, I don't know, 100 times less. And they would get a fairly similar offering. But just because we're offering to enterprise and we make some of those little tweaks, they're small, they're complicated, but they make a big difference. And suddenly we're able to charge 100 times more. And it's not like magic. It's just the matter that you're committing to not only give your offering, whatever, if it's a service, if it's a software, whatever, and also to be in a partnership with this other organization. And I think like that's one of the differences, is that with the consumer model, you like, in order to be successful, you have millions of users, probably maybe thousands. Maybe you could like support a company off of thousands, but probably millions if you're like if you have like a freemium model and everything. So that means like you're not really partnered with millions of people. Like you are, but the relationship is a lot more distant. Whereas with enterprise, it's a very close relationship. Like they're asking for customizations and you're providing them, and you have multiple points of contact within your company that's interacting with multiple points of contact in their company. There's a huge trust that needs to be there. And so because of all that, they're willing to pay, obviously they have bigger budgets, but they're willing to pay a lot more than someone who's like, I'm here, I could be somewhere else tomorrow, and I'm paying like $12 a month.
Totally, man. And I feel like if we look at our history, like, okay, we are building this product, right? The product that we were mentioning at the beginning of this podcast. We made all that effort. We put our hearts onto that. And then it ultimately failed because we didn't get the business model right. We pivot to enterprise. And now, because we did that, we have like tons of people working with us. These families are being fed because like we are able to like, okay, thrive and create a business out of it. Like, we have amazing teammates. Our careers changed because of that. Yep. So I feel like we have to recognize, yes, it is difficult and there are tons of challenges, but that could change the trajectory of your startup.
Yeah.
That could be what decides if this startup is going to fail or if it's going to succeed. And that's why I'm so passionate about this topic, because most people will only see the bad things, right? Oh, like there's all these keywords that I don't know, these problems that I don't actually know how to solve. It's really, really difficult. And yes, it is. We're not saying that it's easy. But at the same time, like now there are more tools that are going to help with that. Like we were talking about SOC 2, right? So now there's Vanta that you can use. It's a great provider. There's Drata. So there are these other startups that are recognizing the value of being enterprise ready, and then they're like creating those services that, hey, you don't need to create your whole InfoSec program by yourself. We can help you with that. We have like frameworks and systems and mechanisms that can help you. And there are tons of things that are cool about enterprise, right? Let's say we're talking about how you can have millions of users and they are not really like partnering with you so close, right? Or sometimes they are not even as loyal as they could be. I think a good example is Snapchat. So we might think that a company is like extremely strong if they have millions of users, because it's going to be so difficult for them to lose millions of customers, right? Maybe not. Maybe if there's another player that is like really, really good, they have like another massive audience and they build something similar to what you have, they might like take you out of business like this. That's what Instagram did with Snapchat. Same thing, but like in contrast, let's talk about enterprise. Enterprise, you have like that huge sales cycle. It takes a long time to close, but once you close, you might have like guaranteed revenue for 1, 2, 3, 5 years. Those deals, they are usually multi-year deals that you can close. You can have lots of like cash early on. With a traditional SaaS, with like a lower average ticket, you might have like very little and then you build to something big. With enterprise, like you can start day one with something big. So I feel like there's so many good things that people don't really talk about because it's not sexy. But man, it's really interesting, and I'm glad that more people are recognizing the importance of that.
Because like there are a lot of things that aren't sexy about doing enterprise. Like you're not able to use all the amazing new technology that's out there a lot of times, like tools that aren't enterprise ready. If you're trying to be enterprise ready for your enterprise customers, you probably can't use a tool that's not enterprise ready. So like you make those sacrifices, and that really sucks because like, I mean, there's this happened to me just the other week. Like there was a tool I was looking at. This would be awesome. This is so cool. Like I would love to just be able to like put my credit card in, start using it. And I was like, I already know, especially since I'm involved with procurement. I was like, I know that they're not ready. Like I've looked at enough vendors. I can, look, like I'm looking at their homepage. I'm looking at their security pages and legal stuff. And I'm like, I know there's like not a chance that they'd be ready for this. And so it's like, I just have to give it up, and that's a bummer for me because I love trying out new tools and technologies and everything. But on the flip side, especially thinking about like product investments, because it's the same thing, right? Like there's a lot of sexy things you would love to do with your product that for enterprise just probably isn't a priority. And yet these other things become priorities, like security issues or like audit logs or like things that are no one like, you know, tweets about how they built this, you know, like it's just like, someone's doing it and they're like, I guess someone told me I had to do this. Like this isn't exciting or like cutting edge, but yet they're solving really big problems for people. And like, even you were mentioning, maybe you won't have 1 million customers. Maybe you only have like 1,000 customers, but yet the 1,000 customers that you have, any one of those could have 1 million customers of their own that are being served through whatever you're offering to that customer. So if you just go like one step beyond yourself, you could actually have, you know, be helping, be, you know, hosting, be whatever, millions and, you know, millions and millions of customers. And like one of our first customers was like a telecom company that I actually don't know, but I'm assuming probably has millions of customers. And like we were facilitating that, you know? And so some of it's just changing the mindset a little bit of you don't necessarily need to have the customers yourself maybe, or to be able to make or use all those cool things. But what if you could enable companies that are making those impact on these huge swaths of people? And but it just feels different, you know, like at the end of the day, I go around and like explain my job to people and it's just not as fun as it used to be. Like you just got to get used to that, you know?
I think the biggest takeaway before we close here is that, yes, enterprise is hard. Enterprise is difficult. There are tons of different concepts that you need to learn. But still, there's a huge business opportunity here. And you can just be like pushing that away and just like ignore that and just think about, okay, the best thing that I can do is just serving those tiny customers until I hit the masses. And that's totally fine. That's a really valid way of doing business. Or you can like try to fight that big monster, which is becoming enterprise ready, discovering what are the processes that you have to make and what are the pieces that you have to put in place. And once you tame that monster, now you can unlock some really, really big things for you and for your company. So that's how I see it. Hopefully people, by the end of this episode, they're also going to look at enterprise a little bit differently. Or they would just see like, oh yeah, that's the boring part. I don't want to, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah. One thing I would end with too is, I think if you're thinking about enterprise, you know, you're thinking about the business model, you're interested in it, you think your product could work in that area, I think one of the most helpful ways to get enterprise ready is to go after it and find someone who wants to use your product, is willing to let you grow through that process. So it's like a little bit more of a partnership to say like, hey, we know you're not enterprise ready, but we're willing, maybe with some discount or whatever, still going to be more than any of your other customers paid. but even with, you know, you're probably going to lose money on the first one, but we'll let you grow through the process and use their requirements as a North Star to understand this new persona, rather than, I think, and this maybe our tendency is like to fight against it because it just feels very different than our own as just an individual, very different. So instead of like fighting against that new thing, embrace it and like let that grow your organization and your various teams to become enterprise ready.